You walk into a gym and you think you know what strong looks like. You have a mental image: big arms, wide shoulders, a thick neck. But if a Neanderthal walked through that door, every person in the building would stop and stare. Not because he looked frightening, because he looked impossible. That is not a metaphor. That is anatomy. Neanderthals were built in a way that modern humans simply are not. Their bones were so dense that when researchers first studied the fossils, they assumed the specimens were diseased, deformed, broken in some way. It took decades of paleoanthropology to accept the obvious conclusion: these were not sick bodies. These were the most physically capable humans that ever lived, and they are gone. That is the question that sits at the center of everything. If Neanderthals were stronger, if their brains were larger, if they survived ice ages and predators and 300,000 years of brutal European winters, why are you here right now and they are not? The answer will completely change what you think intelligence means. Start with the body. A Neanderthal male stood roughly 5'5" to 5'7". That sounds average. But the skeleton tells a different story entirely. Neanderthal bones had cortical walls, the dense outer shell of bone, that were nearly twice as thick as yours. Their muscle attachment points, the ridges where tendons anchor to bone, were so pronounced that biomechanical researchers estimate their grip strength alone would have been somewhere between 2 and 3 times stronger than a modern human male. Eric Trinkhaus at Washington University in St. Louis has spent decades analyzing Neanderthal skeletal remains, and his conclusion is consistent. These were not just strong, they were in a category of physical capability that no living human being can match. The barrel-shaped chest, the wide pelvis, the short, dense limbs. Every feature of the Neanderthal body was optimized for cold environments and explosive physical force. The stocky build conserved heat. The thick limbs absorbed impact. The massive brow ridge anchored jaw muscles powerful enough to process raw, frozen meat. The body was not random. It was engineered by 300,000 years of brutal selection pressure, and it worked. They also ran, efficiently. Contrary to the old caricature, the hunched, shuffling caveman, Neanderthals were fully upright, fully bipedal, and likely capable of sustained endurance movement across rugged terrain. The way their hip joints articulated with the pelvis suggests a stride pattern slightly different from yours, but not slower, not less capable, just different, adapted. Now here is where it gets strange. You have been told your whole life that what separates humans from other animals is brain size, bigger brain, smarter creature. That is the story. And if that story were true, Neanderthals should have outlasted everyone, because Neanderthal brains were, on average, larger than yours. The average modern human brain volume is around 1,350 cubic centimeters. Neanderthal brain volume averaged between 1,410 and 1,740 cubic centimeters. Some specimens were significantly larger than any modern human brain ever measured. Let that sit for a moment. They were stronger, their brains were bigger, they had already survived multiple glacial advances that killed off species far less equipped than they were. And yet somewhere between 40,000 and 30,000 years ago, they vanished. The last confirmed Neanderthal fossils come from southern Spain and Gibraltar, where they appear to have retreated as anatomically modern humans spread across Europe from the east, and then nothing, silence in the fossil record. So what happened? For a long time, the dominant theory was violent replacement. Modern humans arrived, Neanderthals fought back, and the better warriors won. There is some evidence for this. Trauma patterns on certain Neanderthal bones suggest interpersonal violence. There are sites in Europe where Neanderthal and modern human populations appear to have overlapped in time and space. Some researchers believe direct conflict was part of the story, but violence alone does not explain extinction, especially not the extinction of a physically superior population. The deeper answer lives in the shape of the brain, not the size. Svante Pääbo at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology has done more than almost anyone alive to decode what Neanderthals actually were at a genetic level. His team sequenced the Neanderthal genome, which was a technical achievement so extraordinary it earned him the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 2022. And what the genome revealed changed everything. Neanderthals were not a separate species in the clean textbook sense. They interbred with modern humans, repeatedly, successfully. The genetic traces of those encounters are still inside you right now. If you have European or Asian ancestry, between 1 and 4% of your DNA is Neanderthal. Some of those genes affect your immune system, some affect how your hair grows. Some may influence your susceptibility to certain diseases. They were not alien, they were family. Distant, physically overwhelming, cognitively different family. And that difference in cognition is the key. The Neanderthal brain was large, but its architecture was shaped differently from yours. The occipital lobe, the region at the back of the brain responsible for visual processing, was proportionally much larger in Neanderthals than in modern humans. This gave them extraordinary visual acuity, spatial awareness, precise tracking of movement. They could read a landscape the way you cannot. They were exceptional hunters of large game in low visibility, high contrast terrain. But the frontal lobe, the region associated with abstract thinking, symbolic reasoning, long-range planning, and crucially complex social behavior, was proportionally smaller. Not absent, not primitive, smaller. And that difference, measured in centimeters of neural tissue, may have decided everything. Here is what that means in practice. Neanderthals made tools, sophisticated ones. The Mysterian toolkit, which Neanderthals developed independently, included carefully shaped stone points, hafted spears, and scrapers refined for specific tasks. They buried their dead. There is evidence at sites in France and Iraq suggesting intentional burial, possibly with flowers or pigments. They used ochre and other pigments for body decoration. A 2018 study published in Science, led by João Zilhão and his colleagues, presented evidence that Neanderthals in Spain were creating cave art tens of thousands of years before modern humans arrived in Europe. They were not primitive. They were cognitively capable in ways that continue to surprise researchers every decade. But here is the difference that may have cost them everything. Modern humans, when they arrived in Europe around 45,000 years ago, brought something with them that the archaeological record had never seen before at that scale. Not better weapons, not stronger bodies, networks. The evidence for modern human social behavior in this period is extraordinary. Trade goods, shells, pigments, specific stone types, moving hundreds of kilometers from their source. Objects that appear to have had symbolic meaning shared across vast geographic distances. Beads and ornaments that marked group identity that said, "I belong to these people, and these people will help me." Neanderthal sites show local material culture. The tools are made from local stone. The objects are used and discarded within a small radius. There is very little evidence of long-distance exchange, very little evidence of the kind of extended social networks that modern humans were building. Brian Hare at Duke University has argued that what distinguishes modern humans from other hominin species is not raw intelligence, but a specific kind of social cognition. The ability to cooperate with strangers, to extend trust beyond the immediate group, to build alliances across distance and time. Neanderthal groups were likely small. Estimates range from 10 to 30 individuals. Modern human bands were larger and, more importantly, connected to other bands through trade, kinship networks, and shared symbolic systems. When the climate shifted, and it shifted hard multiple times in this period, modern human networks could absorb the shock. Information about food sources, migration routes, and safe shelter could travel across hundreds of kilometers through social bonds. A band that failed could be rescued by its network. Knowledge did not die with individuals. Neanderthal groups, isolated and self-sufficient, had no such buffer. When a band collapsed, its knowledge went with it. When the mammoth herds moved or a winter ran long, there was no distant cousin 3 valleys over who could help. They did not lose because they were weak. They lost because they were alone. And here is what makes this genuinely haunting. Neanderthals were not failed humans. They were a different solution to the same problem: how to survive on a brutal, unpredictable planet with a large brain and a fragile body. Their solution worked for 300,000 years, longer than modern humans have existed, longer than civilization, agriculture, writing, and every empire in history combined, stacked on top of each other.
They watched ice sheets advance and retreat. They hunted creatures that would kill a modern human in seconds. They raised children in environments that would be lethal to you without your technology. They grieved their dead. They made art. They were here. And then a different kind of human arrived. One that was physically weaker, slightly smaller brained, and almost certainly would have lost in any direct physical contest. But this human talked to strangers. This human remembered names of people 2 valleys over. This human traded shells for favors and favors for survival. That is the twist. The most physically dominant human species that ever lived was not undone by a stronger enemy. It was undone by a more social one. Tonight, when you text a friend, when you share something online, when you call in a favor from someone you have not seen in years, you are using the exact cognitive technology that erased the most powerful beings that ever walked this planet. Your weakness was always your superpower. You just never knew where it came from.